Hey church, I hope you are doing well. My name is Josh, and I have the honor of being the youth pastor at Judson. I'd imagine there are a lot of you watching this that I have never met, so hello. It is an honor to connect with you through this platform. For today's devotion, we will be taking a look at the book of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount. When I first went to Bible college, I had a professor tell me that if I tried to fit the entire Sermon on the Mount into one singular sermon, I was missing the point. All these years later, I finally understand what he was talking about. There is so much packed into the Sermon on the Mount that if you try to throw it all out there in one sermon, you are skimming over so many things and you are not actually getting into anything. So the Sermon on the Mount, the way that it is structured is Jesus is literally on a hill teaching all of these teachings, and at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he enters into his conclusion. His conclusion says this: anyone who listens to my teachings and follows it is wise, like a person who builds his house on a solid rock. Though the rains come and the floodwaters rise and winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on a bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. There are two principles I want to talk about today. One is a broad principle, and then one is a very specific principle that we can gather from the Sermon on the Mount. The broad principle is the passage that we just read. In this passage, Jesus is saying, if you listen to my teachings and if you do what I say, you are like a person who builds his house on a strong foundation. However, if you ignore my teachings and you don't listen to him, you will build your house, you will build your life on a shaky foundation. Now that teaching applies directly to the Sermon on the Mount, but I believe it can be stretched to apply to all of Jesus' teachings. Okay, so the first principle is if you take Jesus' teachings and you apply them to your life, you are like a person with a strong foundation. If you abandon Jesus' teachings and you don't follow them, you are like a person who builds their house on a weak foundation. And in this passage specifically, Jesus says, when the storms come, like hard times are coming in your life, things are coming in your life that you're not going to expect, things are coming in your life that are going to break your heart, things are coming in your life that are going to disappoint you, that are going to frustrate you. Are you going to be a person who can withstand it? Or are you going to be a person who falls because of all these things in your life? Jesus says that if you take his teachings and you apply them to your life, you will be able to weather the storm. Now, specifically, I want to go back one chapter, still on the Sermon on the Mount, in the beginning, towards the beginning, in Matthew chapter 6. Let's read this together. Matthew chapter 6 says this, verse 1. Watch out! Don't do your good deeds publicly, to be admired by others, or you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. And that's tricky. That is super tricky because here's the thing. When we give, when we do good things, it feels good. Because being helpful to other people gives us joy. And then when we're joy-filled, we want to share that joy with others and let them know about what we've done. And in sharing our good deeds with others and even letting people know about maybe some of the good things that we do, that actually brings us a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy as well. Like, it's a very natural order. It feels good. It brings us joy. And there's nothing wrong with that. Somewhere in that, though, we can get mixed up. So if doing good brings joy, we share joy with others, and the praise from others feels good. If we're not careful, we may start with wanting to get praise from others to bring us joy. Then we do good for others to get said praise. It's very tricky. That's what Jesus says, and I think the important line in that passage is in order. Like, guard your heart. Make sure you're not doing good things in order to receive compliments or praise or applause from others around you. I think it could be a very tricky thing, very, very tricky thing in this day and age that we're living in right now. And I think one of the things in this passage that really stands out to me is if you take that word hypocrite, and if you look at the Greek translation of that word, the word is actually actor. It is the same term that was used for the actors in the synagogues and in the streets. Jesus is saying, hey, be careful not to be a fake. Be careful not to be an actor. Be careful not to put a mask on. Be careful not to be someone who you're not. Don't go around being nice to people or helping them or giving them as a performance, because if you do that, the applause and the attention and the recognition that you get from others, that's all you're ever going to get. So when you give, when you bless others, don't go around announcing it. Don't go around trying to get people to be proud of you or to get people to applaud you. Eugene Peterson, one of my heroes, had a translation of scripture called The Message. I want you to listen to how he translates that section of scripture. Matthew chapter 6. Be especially careful when you are trying to be good, so that you don't make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding. When you do something for someone else, don't call attention to yourself. You've seen them in action. I'm pretty sure play actors, I call them. Treating prayer meetings and street corner alike as a stage. Acting compassionate as long as someone is watching, playing to the crowds. They get applause, true, but that's all that they get. When you help someone out, don't think about how it looks. Just do it. Quietly. That is the way your God, who conceived you in love, working behind the scenes, helps you out. So, church family, I hope we can take that passage from Jesus